Okay, let's start recording. Okay, so yeah, the first thing we need to do is download Godot. I put a link right here in the MMP 270 channel. I'll put one in the class voice channel as well. Sonora said, I'm having some Wi-Fi issues, so I may have to watch the recorded lecture later. Okay, no problem. Sorry about the Wi-Fi issues. So if you're on a Mac, you should be able to just download the app and put it in your applications folder, and it should work fine. If you're on Windows, you have to be a little careful. You have to make sure that you put there's two parts to the app, and you have to have them in the same place. It's not too crazy, but it may not work if you separate them. So you can see I actually already have it on my desktop. I'll go ahead and delete it. So okay, so if you downloaded it, get rid of that. You should have it in your downloads folder, and it'll look like this. And you just want the 64-bit version. It's a zip file. I think this. Let's do. Okay. So what you want to do is extract it. So you can right-click on it and go to Extract All. And you don't want to put it in your downloads folder. We want to keep a nice clean downloads folder. So let's put it on our desktop. You could put it in the like program files or something like that, but it's easy to find if we just put it on the desktop. So I'm going to click on the desktop here and click Select Folder, and then click Extract. And what we're going to see is it's going to actually put two things on the desktop. There's Godot, which has the little icon, so it's easy to see. And then there's the Godot console. For whatever reason, in Windows, the console and the app are not bundled together like they are on the Mac. And so we can see both of those programs there. And that's fine. You could also put it in a folder, like if you want to have a Godot folder, kind of like the Pascal folder, and just put them both in there, you can do that. But I'm just going to leave it as is. So you got to have those in the same place. If you lose one of them or whatever, it's pretty fast to download. It's not a huge application, so. But yeah, once you have that set up, let's close these. We can go ahead and open it up. And this is what it's going to open to start with before you have a project. It's going to open the project manager. And we'll go over this in a second. I'm going to go back to the browser real quick and go back to the class page and go to the schedule. And so what we're working on today is this Godot intro. And so we just did the first step, downloading Godot. There's a bunch of steps here, and I'm going to kind of go over them. And then if you guys can follow along, that's good. If you want to just watch and do it later, that's fine as well. There are a lot of steps for just getting things started. So yeah, and there's a lot of like little things that if you get them wrong, it can be hard to fix later, but it shouldn't be a big deal. But we'll just try to make sure we get all of the steps right. So I'll put a link to this in the chat as well. Okay. I'm kind of like doing two chats at once, but whatever. And so we're just going to follow these steps. We just downloaded Godot, and we're going to create a scene. I guess I should have added a step for create the project first, but we'll do that now. I'll update this later. So yeah, when you get this project manager, this is where like you can have, obviously you might have multiple different games. And the thing that we want to do here is make sure that we select our folder where we're going to keep our games, so we don't like have files just floating all over the place. I usually put everything on the desktop just because it's easy to find there, and it's just like simple. You might prefer other setups depending on what your machine looks like, but it'll be easy if we all kind of do the same thing. So it says you don't have any projects. Do you want to explore the asset library? Right now, we're not going to look at that. We're just going to kind of set things up from scratch. So there are a lot of things that we can do by just downloading projects and looking at them and getting started with templates and stuff like that. But I wanted just today, just like really start from scratch, just so you guys can see all the different things that you have to do to set up a project. So if you ever have to do that in the future, you won't be like confused or lost. I do have like a template file that you can download if you ever want to just get started quickly on something without spending a lot of time setting it up. And I also have some assets for the class that we'll download a little bit later to help us get started. So anyway, I'm just going to click cancel here. And so I can always go back to the asset library project. So there's a lot of projects in here that people have contributed to this library. And I think they're all free, and you can download them and see how they work and build stuff on top of them. So that's a good way to learn stuff. If you like really want to learn something specific, you can find a project that somebody else has done and kind of build off of it. So that's the library. We're going to go back to our local projects. So this is projects on our computer. And we're just going to make a new project, which is a button right here. And click new project. And we want to just give the project a name. So let's just call this my game. You could call it, whatever you want. And you can change this later if you want to. But then we have to choose where it's going to go on the computer. So we made this game folder on Tuesday where we have our art. And what we want to do is like keep them in the same place. So I want to choose this folder. And let's actually just call this game so that it's not the same exact title. So I'm going to click browse. And this opens like a different, Godot has like its own file system UI. So it works pretty much the same way as the Windows like file explorer, but it is a little bit different. So to find this, I'm on like my documents folder. So I could click on here and like go in there, or I could just like type stuff here, but I can also click back. And this brings me to my user folder, and I can find the desktop from there and select this folder. And then right now there's, oh wait, I forgot to select. And then I want to click my game. And then I'm going to create a folder here. So that puts this new folder called game inside of the game folder. So Godot really wants your project name to match the folder. That's how it can kind of remember where to find the files. So if you see a little green mark there, you should be good to go. And you just want to make sure that your game is inside your game folder, or if you called it like MMP 270 or something like that, that's fine as well. Then looking at the renderer, the default is the OpenGL ES3, and that's good for like more like 3D games that you would play on your computer. But we're actually going to be making a 2D game that is going to be optimized for the web, at least for this first beginning project. So our game will run faster and work a little bit better if we actually go with OpenGL ES2. So let's click on that for our renderer. And then once you've got that set up, you can click create and edit. And that's going to bring you to the main Godot interface. And so I'll go over how this works in a second. There's a lot of stuff in here, so I'm not going to cover every single component today, but we'll go over the basic parts of the interface and then get started building a scene. Any questions before we get into that? Everybody's good so far? Okay. So this is a default interface. You can make a lot of changes like you can with most software these days. Like if you want to move the windows around to different places. I have like my own setup for when I'm working on a personal project, but I usually keep it the same for when I'm teaching, just so it always looks the same. But you have like a few basic windows. The window in the middle is kind of like your main working window where you're going to be like designing and editing. We're going to be in the 2D area, which kind of looks like this. And there's also a script area for writing code. And there's an asset library area for downloading assets. And then if you get other assets, some of them will create their own area. But we won't do that yet. So we're going to be in the 2D area. And inside here, there's some different like guidelines that show you the space. It's kind of hard to see on the projector, but you should be able to see it better on your screen. You can see that there's this like origin point right here, and there's this kind of like blue outline here that represents like what the camera or the size of the game window is. And if you scroll in really far, you'll see, so this red line represents the x-axis or like the horizontal axis, and the green line represents the y-axis. And then there's markers up here. They're very small, but you can see it's like 0, 5, 10, 15. So those are the x values for pixels, and then the same thing on the left side. And you can zoom in using this thing. So if I click on this, it'll go to 100%. And if I scroll in and out, it'll zoom in and out of the window. And if I hold the middle mouse button, which some of you guys have mouses, some of you don't. If I hold the middle mouse button, that's how I usually move around. But I think you can also do it by holding maybe Shift or Control or Alt. No, let's try the right. Oh, you can do it with the right mouse button without any modifiers at all. So I don't know why I used the middle mouse button. Maybe that's like something I took from another software like Blender or something. Anyway, so you can scroll in and out with the scroll wheel. So yeah, that's our basic window. There's a bunch of tools up here. I'm going to skip those for now. We'll go over those when we start building a scene. But this is our kind of like main window in the middle. The next window to look at is the file system window down here. This shows us like what's in our project and how it connects to our computer. And so this folder here that says RES, I'm going to increase my, you guys don't have to do this because, well, you can if you want, but if you go, I'm going to increase the font size on my project just so you guys can see it better. So you don't have to do this, but if you want to make it easier to see, one of the options with the editor under this editor menu at the top, if you go to editor settings, there's a bunch of settings here under interface editor, and you can change the font size. So I'm going to increase my font size a bunch. See. Oh, that's too big. Okay, let's go down. Okay, that should be fine. And then there's a code font size. We're not going to write code, so I'm going to ignore that for today. And it says I have to save and restart, so I'm going to do that real quick. So I'm just doing that to make it more visible on the screen. If you guys want to, you can increase the font size. It might be easier to use. And then you can change the size of any of these windows. So I'm going to make mine just a little bit bigger since I made the font size bigger. But again, you don't need to do that. Whatever works for your setup. There's also like, if you look under here, editor layout, you can like create a layout and then save it so that you have it later. And then you can go back to the default layout. So maybe I'll save this layout as class. Okay, so back to the file system. So down here, this is like shows us what files we have in our project. So a lot of what we're going to be doing is making art and then adding it into our game, or making sound and then adding it into our game. So we want to make sure that we know where all of our assets are. And so right now, if I right click on here, it says open in the file manager down here. And so if I do that, we'll see it should take me to where my game is on my computer. And you can see I'm on my desktop and my game, and then here's my game. And then I have my art over here because I might have some art files that I don't actually want inside the game. I want to like create the art, but then put some of it in the game and some of it not. So my game folder and my art folder are going to be separate, at least for now. But we're going to have to like put some of the art files into the game. So we'll go over how to do that later. So yeah, if you ever get confused, just right click on that RES, which is short for resources folder, and go down to open in file manager, and you'll see where your game is on your computer And that works the same way on Mac and PC. Right now, there's nothing really in here. We have this like default env file that just has some like basic stuff about how our environment is set up. And then we have like the Godot icon file, which eventually we'll get rid of. But we'll add some stuff in here. And this is where you can create things. So like if I right click on RES, I can make a folder, I can make a new scene, I can make a script, or I can add a resource. So we'll do that in a second. Let me go back to the 2D view. So then up here on the top left is the scene view. This is where we construct the scene. So we add things like images and backgrounds and players and NPCs. All that stuff gets created inside this scene. So when I talk about the scene hierarchy, I'm talking about this window here. So if I say look for the player in the scene hierarchy, what I'm saying is look over here. The import tab we'll look at later. And then over here, there's two important tabs. The inspector tab tells you all the information about whatever like component you have selected at the moment. So we'll look at that in a minute. And then the node tab gives you like more information about the connections between the component and the rest of the scene. So those are kind of the basic things. We'll go over other parts of the editor as we kind of like learn new parts of Godot. But for now, we're just going to set up like a really, really simple scene. So let's go back to our lab and look at our instructions. Oh yeah, we want to create some folders. So we'll do that next. So we're going to do this in the file system, but you'll see it's going to create everything we create in the file system is actually created in our file explorer on the computer as well. So I can just go in here and right click and click a new folder. And as you're probably getting the sense, I love to be as organized as I can be. So I'm going to, before I've even created any assets, I'm going to create folders for the different types of assets that I'm going to use. So it's really easy to find stuff in the future. So one type of asset that I need are sprites. This is where I'm going to put all of my images for the game. So I'm going to create a sprites folder. Another type of asset that I need are scripts. So the code that I want to use in my game. So I'm going to put this, I'm going to create a scripts folder and add it there. Another type of asset that I might need, not today, but eventually, is audio, sound files. So I'm going to create an audio folder. And another type of asset that I would need are scenes. And I'm actually going to have a lot of different types of scenes. So we're just going to start with our main scenes folder, and then we'll make more scene folders later. There's a few other types of assets that we'll make eventually, but those are kind of a good basic set to get you started. So yeah, those are some folders. And again, if I right click on my resources folder and go to open in file manager, you'll see that it actually made all of these folders in my computer. So this, whatever I'm doing in the file system matches what's actually on my computer. So yeah, we've created some folders, we can get organized. And now we're going to create our first scene. So there's a bunch of different ways to do this. We can see that we already have this like scene open and it says empty right here. Godot kind of created that because it has this window, and if you don't have a scene as part of your game already, it assumes that you're going to make a scene. And so over here in the scene hierarchy, we have a few options. We can create a root node for a 2D scene, a 3D scene, a user interface scene, or some other type of scene. And one of the things you'll start to notice is that like everything in Godot is a scene, essentially. Like little players are scenes, little bad guys are scenes, the whole level is a scene, the menus are scenes. Everything is a scene, and everything becomes like scenes within scenes, and we're going to be creating all sorts of different scenes. So that part of it is a little bit confusing. There are some game engines that use different terms for that, like Unity. If you've ever used Unity before, they refer to, they have scenes, but then they have game objects. So game objects are like things that are in the scene, and then scenes are collections of game objects. In Godot, everything is a scene. A game object is a scene. They're all scenes. So in some ways, it makes it simpler because you don't have to worry about these different types. But in other ways, it's kind of confusing to talk about. Anyway, we're going to create a 2D scene. So just click on the 2D scene here, and it's going to create what's called a root node. A root node is like the sort of like main part of your scene where everything is attached, so everything knows where it is. It's kind of like if you've ever done HTML, like in MMP 100, you always started with like the HTML tag at the top, and then you would add like the head and the body tag, and the paragraph and the other stuff. This is kind of like our HTML tag. It's saying like this is where the scene starts. I'm going to go ahead and rename this node and just call this, should I call this? I'll call this my first scene, because we're probably going to make other scenes that are going to be more sophisticated than this in the future. And so I haven't actually added anything into the scene, but I'm going to go ahead and save it. I always like to save everything so I know where it is. And you can see right here, it's already telling us that this isn't saved, and it has like a little star here, so we know it's not saved. So I can hit Control S to save, and that'll bring up my file system thing, or I can go to Save Scene under the Scene menu. So I can click on Save Scene here. That'll do the same thing. I usually use the key commands, so I'll say Control S to save the scene, and then here's where you want to be careful. You don't want to just throw the scene anywhere because your files will get really crazy. I want to go into scenes, and I'm gonna make some other folders. For now, I'll just leave this in here as my first scene. So I'll call this my first scene, and we're gonna save it in there. Okay, so we've created our first scene, and now if we look under here, you can see my first scene. And all this really is like some data about what's in the scene. If we go and look at this in the file manager, you can see it has its own file type. It's a TSCN file. But if I open this in like a text editor, so if I go to, I can open this with like Sublime Text. And I have some other stuff open. Let's close this. So you can see the data that's actually in here. It just says GD scene format 2. So that means it's a 2D scene. And then here's the first node, my first scene, and it's a 2D node. So it's a node that has essentially, a node is just like one block of stuff, and everything in the program is a node, essentially. And what a 2D node is, just a node that has a X and a Y position, basically. So it's in 2D space rather than 3D space. Okay, so we've got my first scene node, and now we're going to add something in there. So we're going to add a sprite. Let's see. Oh, we need like an image for this. So we could use the Godot icon. You could also use I guess I don't have any. We didn't draw a tree the other day. Although we could get it from the assets folder. So yeah, we need some images to use here. And so we're skipping ahead a little bit, but one thing that I use a lot when we're going over the demos is these assets folder that I created. So this has like a lot of different assets that I've created in previous versions of the class. So if we haven't quite gotten to a topic yet, you can use a script from like a later topic. So we could also just draw a tree real quick if you want to do that. Maybe in a bit we can take a break and you guys can work on stuff and draw some stuff to throw in here. But for now, I'm just going to click download the MMP 270 assets folder. And so this is under this add the player script. So we're skipping ahead a couple steps to get this assets folder. But I'll put a link to this in the Discord so you guys can get that. And this just has like a bunch of stuff in it. So there's scripts in there, there's scenes, there's a lot of just like default scenes so you can see how things work. And this is a good thing to just like put inside of our project. So what I'm going to do now that I've downloaded it, I've got my, I'm going to go to my desktop. So I've got my game here. And so I'm going to go into the game. And right next to everything else I've already created, I'm just going to throw in this assets folder. So I'm going to open another File Explorer window over here and go to my downloads. And so there's the 270 assets that I just downloaded. I'm going to delete this Godot thing that I downloaded earlier. I don't need that anymore. And what I want to do is just extract this assets folder into my game folder. So I have access to all the stuff in there. I'm going to click on this and right click and click extract all. And then go to browse, go to my game on the desktop. I should go to the desktop first. So I'll go to the desktop, go to my game, go into game, and then I'm just going to select this folder here and click extract. And it always does this. The Windows UI sucks, but whatever. So let's just close this. And it's not there. So where did it go? Okay, I didn't get an error or anything. Okay, let's try that again. So let's extract all, browse, go to the desktop, my game, select folder, extract. Oh, crap. Oh, you know what? I realized I shouldn't have done it like that. My bad. Okay, so it actually extracted all of this stuff directly into the game. Okay, I have to start. That was really stupid on my part, so just ignore me for a second. I'm just gonna delete all of this shit. It's not gonna work there. I'll just delete the whole fonts folder. Let's just delete the whole thing. Okay, so I accidentally extracted all of the individual files into the folders, which was dumb of me. So I'm just going to recreate those folders real quick. So I had scenes, I had scripts, and I had Sprite. Okay. So what I want to do is extract this into its own folder. So let's just extract it right here inside the downloads folder first. Okay, so now we have our 270 assets folder, and you can see it has the same folders with a couple extras as we've already created in our project. And we're just going to drag this over here so it's in its own separate area. Okay, sorry about that. When we go back to Godot, so now you should see it's going to import all this stuff. And there's this 270 assets folder here. And so you want to have that separate from the rest of what you're working on so you can use the stuff in here, but you don't have to look at it all the time. So anyway, I'm going to resave my first scene. And I'm just going to throw a sprite on here. So we're going to actually add an image in here. So I'll show you guys how to do this, and then maybe we'll take a break for a second so you guys can work through it before we move on to the next thing. But in my 270 assets folder, I have some sprites, and I'm just going to look for like a tree. So I have a little tree down here, and so I'm just going to add this into my my scene, so I can start designing a little scene. But so you can drag and drop, but that's not really the way you should generally use Godot. What we want to do is be super organized as usual. So what we want to do is click on my first scene, and I'm going to right click, and this is how you're going to be like creating stuff in Godot a lot of the time. Is I can either click the plus and the link button, or I can right click and go to add child node or instance child scene, either one. I can also just hit Control A, and that brings up a new node window, or Control Shift A, and I can make a child scene. So for this one, I'm making a node, so I'm going to hit Control A. And the really nice thing about this interface here, you're going to use this a lot because this is how you build out the game. You can search through it just by looking at stuff. So I can see, like, here's my node 2D. And so under here, all of the different things that I might have in a game are under this node. So my animated sprite, the camera, collision shapes, all this crazy stuff is under here. So you can search through it just to see what's available, but you can also use this little search function at the top if you know what you're looking for. And what I'm actually looking for is just another generic node 2D. So just like I like to have folders for everything, so everything is super structured and organized, I also like to have little nodes for all the main sections of my scene. So I'm going to create just another generic node 2D, and I'm going to double click on it. I'm going to rename it scenery. Okay, so that's really all it is. There's nothing really special about it. I'm just going to call it scenery, and anything that fits into the scenery category in my game window is going to go in here. So then I'm going to go there. I'm going to click the plus again, and now I'm actually going to add an image. So for an image, what I want to use is a sprite. And so if I type in sprites, there's a few different options. There's an animated sprite and a regular sprite. So I only have one image for this tree. It's not animated. So I'm just going to use the regular sprite and click create. I'm going to rename this tree. Oh, sorry. To do that, I just click on the node and hit enter on the keyboard, and I can retype the name. You can also right click on it and go to rename and type the name again. But the fast way to do it is if you have the node selected and I hit enter, it lets me edit the name of the node. Okay, so now I want to actually add something to this node. So now I get to use my inspector tab over here, which is how we make modifications to the different types of nodes. So I'm going to go all the way over to the right over here. And you can see there's all these different like areas with different properties. And we're going to look at all of them real quick. So there's this thing called the texture. That's what's actually like the image. So the texture is what we, in game design, that's how you refer to like the image file that you're applying to the node. So I want to add a texture. So I'm going to click on this drop down and go to load. That's how I load a texture from my assets. And so I'm going to click load, and I'm going to go to my 270 assets, go to sprites, and then I have all these little sprites in here. I'm going to click on this tree, and I'm going to click open. And now we can see this really small little tree. You can zoom in, and there it is. So there's a lot of other things that I can do with this. I'm just going to go over a couple, and then we'll take a break for a second. So I'm going to zoom in here. Right now it's like directly in the middle of my scene because that's just where it shows up. We're not going to worry about the normal map or any of this other stuff right now. But what we're going to do is skip down here to where it says Node 2D and look at the transform. So the transform is what we taught in game design with a game engine. We always talk about the transform of our different objects. That's just information about where it is in the scene. And the rotation and the scale. So all of those different properties are part of the transform. And I can edit these directly in here, or I can use tools in my scene window to edit them. So if I want to edit them directly, I can click on this X, and if I type in 100, it moves the X value of the tree in the scene. And I can say negative 100, and it goes the other way. So let's go back to 100. The nice thing about Godot is once you change a default value, this little circle with an arrow will show up. And if I want to reset the value, I can just click on that and it just instantly resets. So that's really convenient. So let's put it back at 100, and then I'll put the Y at 100. And then I can also drag on these values. So if I like drag back and forth, it doesn't look like it's moving because the values are changing very slowly. But you can see by just clicking and dragging on the value, it's changing the value in the editor. And if I hold Control, or no, maybe it's Alt. I don't know. I thought there was a way to speed that up, but it doesn't look like I can. Okay, anyway. I can also rotate the sprite using the rotation degrees. I probably don't really need to do that with the tree, although maybe I could rotate it like just a little bit. And then the scale changes the scale of the image. So if I change the scale to 2 by 2, it scales it up. So that's convenient. Generally, when we're creating a game, we want to avoid scaling images because when you scale an image, that means that you have your original image file, and the game engine has to do all the work to scale up all of the data in that image every single time it's drawing the frame. And one of the things we'll realize as we build more complex games is that a game is a really crazy piece of software that's doing like a million things all at once. And the more things you make it do, the worse it's going to perform in general. So if you have a tree and it needs to be twice as big, what you really should do is go back to the original artwork and scale that up and re-import it so that Godot doesn't have to do that work every single frame of the game that's running. So I'm going to undo the scale. So just in general, I try to avoid scaling things if I can. So yeah, we'll talk about that more when we make more images and stuff. Okay, so I'm gonna skip over the rest of this for now and show you guys a couple more things. So I can do all this stuff with these tools up here as well. So my main tool is just this like little mouse arrow, and if I click on this, I can just move it. So it just will kind of like guess what I'm trying to do. So if I click on the tree, it's gonna let me move it around. Okay. If I click on one of these boxes, it's gonna let me scale it, or like these little dots. And is there a rotate part? Maybe not. But then I also have tools that are dedicated to one thing. So this little move tool here, if I turn that on, I'm only going to be able to move. I can't do other stuff. If I go to the rotate tool, I can only rotate. And if I go to the scale tool, I can only scale. So that way, I don't actually use these a lot, but they exist if you want to use them. Another thing that's really convenient for designing, I usually just stick with the select mode, this thing. There's also key commands for this, like the arrow is Q, move is W, E is rotate, and what is this? S is scale. Anyway, so I'll just hit Q to go back to the arrow. You can see when I'm dragging around, I can just put the tree anywhere. But for designing, especially with a 2D game, sometimes we want to use like a grid with like regular intervals. And so you can see these two little icons here. I guess I turned the font size up, but the icons are still really small. I wonder if I can change that. Let's see, icon. No, I guess I can't change. The icons are like much smaller than the text now, which is sort of weird looking. Oh, I guess I could just change the whole display scale. I don't know what that's going to do, so I'll play with that later. Anyway, there's these two little icons here that look like little magnets. And so one, if I turn this one on, it'll show me this grid, and my tree will snap to the parts of the grid. So that's convenient for designing if I want everything to be lined up. If you don't really care about that, then you don't probably need it. The other one does smart snapping, which just makes it move a little bit different. It's a little bit faster going to them. And then if you don't want the grid to look exactly the way it looks, you can click on these little arrows and you can go to configure snap and you can change the grid steps. So right now it's 8 by 8 pixels. If I want like a wider grid, I can go to 16 by 16. And so now I have larger areas between my grid cells. And I can also change the number of lines. So if I change the number of lines to like 1, I guess we don't see that. Primary line every, we do 32. It doesn't really change anything. Okay. Let's try 2 and see what that looks like. Oh, I see. So it's kind of hard to see when you're zoomed in, but it changes the highlighting. So let's go back to what they had actually. Let's go back to 8. Okay, so now if I zoom out, it's probably hard to see up there, but there's like slightly brighter lines every 8 steps. So that makes it a little bit easier to design depending on what you're working on, but you don't really have to do this. So those are some useful things. Another thing over here, you can see this little lock button. And so if you like where something is and you don't want to accidentally move it, you can click on the lock. And now if I try to move the tree, I can still move it. That's kind of weird. That is not what I expected that to do. Okay. Well, let's see. If I click on the lock and this thing, Oh, now I can't select it. Okay, that's what I want to do. So maybe the lock doesn't even matter. No, the lock matters. Okay, so this little thing means that I can't select it, and then the lock, I guess, does something else. I don't know. Now I can still move it. Okay, that's weird. Oh, I'm not. Oh, sorry. I'm doing something really silly. Okay, what I was actually moving in that case, that's actually a good thing to go over. So the reason I was confused about that is I wasn't actually moving my tree. I was moving my scenery node. And this is kind of confusing because all of the nodes in my scene have directionality. So if I move the scenery node, this is going to make more sense if I duplicate this tree. So let me do that real quick because that was the next thing I was going to do. So if you're making a scene, you're probably going to need a lot of the same elements. And there's a really easy way to do that. If I right click on the tree, you'll see there's a duplicate button. And once I have the tree set up basically the way I want it, I can just hit Command or Control D, probably Command D on Mac, and I can make another tree. And so if I want to make a lot of trees, I can just keep hitting Control D. And then if I want to do it faster, I can select all my trees. Uh, like that, and then hit Command D, Control D, and now I have a bunch more trees that I can add. So if you're designing something that has a lot of parts in it, duplicating stuff and grouping stuff together is really, really useful. Okay, so the thing that was confusing before, what I was actually doing was moving the scenery. So the scenery has its own transform. And so if I move the scenery right now, I'm going to move all of these trees. If I have those scenery nodes selected, I'm moving the whole thing. Whereas if I have the tree selected, then I'm just moving the one tree. And so even though I had this tree locked, what I was actually doing, since they were in the same place, that's where I was off, is that the scenery node is at 0, 0, and my tree was also at 0, 0. So I can still move the tree if I move the scenery. So what I really want to do is lock my scenery, and now I can't move any of this stuff. I can't even move well, I can still move the tree. Okay. But if I turn on the select one, then I can't select it. So yeah. So I can lock down that scenery, and now I can edit other stuff without worrying about changing what's going on with my scene. So it takes a little while to get used to, but essentially, like something that I apply to the main node applies to all of the children of that node. Um, I'll give you another quick example of that, and then we'll take a little pause. So I can also, let's uh, duplicate this whole scenery thing. So let's change this, let's call this like forest. And then I'm gonna hit Control D. And so now I have a whole other forest. So let's grab that. I'm gonna turn off the lock, and I'm gonna move, oops, I'm gonna move this forest up here. So I can make a whole new node. And then something I can do that's pretty cool in Godot is I can choose this node, go back over to the inspector over here, and look at this visibility area. And I can actually change the color of everything inside of this forest too. So if I change the color over here and I want to make it like a little darker or something like that, I can actually modulate the color of all of those sprites at the same time because I'm applying it to this main forest 2 node. And so it applies to everything inside of it. So that's a really easy way to create extra kind of cool textures and stuff. So maybe I can put this forest kind of behind the other forest. Right now it's on top, but what I can do is just drag this up here, and now it'll be behind it. So it kind of creates like a little bit of a shadow kind of thing going on. So yeah, that's how I can add some stuff in here. So we still have a few steps to do, but let's take a little pause there. If you guys have any questions, I can take a look at them. And then if we have time, we're actually going to add a player into this scene and start moving the player. So yeah, let me stop recording.